Hello, and welcome to a new episode of The Career Changers. Our guest today is Haley Pollack, co-founder and executive director of Bright Spot Network, a national nonprofit that supports families navigating a parent's cancer diagnosis. She came to this work through her cancer diagnosis after experiencing the resource gap firsthand for young parents with cancer. Before this, she worked at the intersection of criminal justice and education, and also as an academic. Today, we are going to talk about her career change journey and her mission of supporting families navigating a parent's cancer diagnosis. Hi, Haley. Welcome to the Career Changers.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Elisa.
It's my pleasure. So let's start with your background. How did you start your professional life, or better, what was your first job?
So my first job was babysitter for sure, like many
Yeah,
young
because
girls. Yeah, I was a babysitter first, but my first job, like out of college, I worked at a small nonprofit that worked with like intergenerational connections, so connecting older people and younger people to kind of build community together and help one another to, I don't know, to be their best selves. So yeah.
Hmm. And what was your dream job when you were a child?
My dream job was like to be an archaeologist. I really like just and still just very interested in the past. And actually, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but my PhD is in history, and it's very different than being like Indiana Jones or something. But yeah, I just always was really yeah, just interested in the past as being like almost like another world, and thought that that was so cool to be able to learn about it through stuff, through like discovering stuff in the ground.
Hmm. So you mentioned your PhD. What is your educational background?
Sure. So I got my PhD 10 years ago. I have a PhD in US history. And yeah, so I started that like academic journey like from college. I had a professor that just really, I like loved college. I loved learning. I loved history, and I loved yeah, I just like loved the classroom and reading. And um so I decided to take the leap to be an academic. And I learned that in my graduate studies and my graduate career, I studied the US West, and wrote a dissertation on violence and memory, and how we remember the past and how we remember past violences, how they're memorialized in museums and in books and in all different types of things. But one of the things I really discovered about myself is that I like really love learning, and I really love teaching, but that like research wasn't getting me up in the morning, and that to be an academic, you really have to be able, like the research has to really like pop you out of bed, and it just was never popping me out of bed in the morning. It was always the part of the job that that I wasn't as inspired by. I was inspired about talking about ideas. I was inspired about like learning about ideas, but I mean I actually love writing, but it just wasn't the thing for me. So
Mhm. So how and when did you decide at this stage of your life to change your career?
So after I got my PhD, I was I wasn't quite, I didn't really realize quite yet that how much I'd put so much time into it. I figured, of course, this is what I'm gonna do. I worked so hard for this. I always joke that there was the tears to words ratio in my dissertation was like really off. Like I really worked hard, you know. And so it wasn't an immediate, it certainly wasn't immediate, but um pretty quickly I realized that I just wasn't happy, and that I, like I said, like I loved the learning and I loved the teaching. And so I was trying to figure out how I could kind of capture that feeling of teaching, even if I wasn't in the classroom. And so I pivoted to something else that I really cared about, which was, you know, criminal justice, and
Mm.
um, working with people who were currently incarcerated. And so I started volunteering for what was called at the time the Prison University Project, which is a college inside San Quentin, and has recently become accredited and become a college called Mount Tamalpais College. And so I started volunteering there, and it just really changed my life. It made me like think about things I hadn't thought about. The students are absolutely incredible. And I got really involved there. I eventually joined the board, and it just made me change made me pivot totally. And so I started working at what I say is like the intersection of criminal justice and education. I started to work for organizations that were helping currently incarcerated people get college educations inside, as well as helping to connect them to colleges on the outside as part of like reentry plans and things like that when they got released.
Mm. So it seems you had a very interesting breadth of experience
Yeah.
in different careers. And
Yeah.
when did you reach a point where this job as well, this career as well, started to feel not right anymore? And what did you think to do next?
Well, with that, it was different, right? With the academic piece, I was like, I'm not happy here and I need to do something different. Like what's gonna fill me? Like I love work. It's really important to me. It's a part of my identity. And so I was like, how can I fill that identity with something that's meaningful? But with the work in criminal justice, it was really my cancer diagnosis that changed it. I love that work. I'm still committed to that work. I think that work is critically important. And is just amazing. But when I had my cancer diagnosis, so I was diagnosed with colon cancer, stage 3C colon cancer when I was 37. And at the time, I had a 6-month-old baby and a 3-year-old. So I had really just gotten back to work. I think, I think I'd been back at work like 6 weeks or 2 months. Like I really had not been back at work for very long when I got my diagnosis. And it pretty immediately like threw me into questions about what I was doing. Not least because I had to take a lot of time off of work again, to care for myself. So I stayed in my job that I was in for about a year, maybe even a year and a half, when eventually I started Bright Spot.
Mhm. And how did your cancer diagnosis lead you to find Bright Spot Network, and what is it?
Yeah, so Bright Spot Network is a US-based national nonprofit that works with parents who are diagnosed with cancer while they're raising young kids. And so I started the organization. So, like I said, I was diagnosed with stage 3C colon cancer, and I had a 6-month-old baby and a 3-year-old at the time. And pretty immediately, like, when I heard the words, "you have cancer," the first thing I asked was, well, like, what do I tell my kids? How do I, my first thoughts were of my kids. How will my, curious 3-year-old handle this? How will my six-month-old like survive? I was nursing at the time. Like, how would she survive with me in surgery and chemo, like all these different things? And so I went to the internet right, that's like what we do is I typed in like, cancer, wean, like cancer, like young mom, like all these things. And like nothing popped up or nothing that was helpful popped up. A lot of the advice was outdated. There was advice that was like, don't talk to your 3-year-old about this. They're not going to remember anyway. There was things out there, but they were maybe on like a breast cancer website, or this website, or that website. And I was like in the middle of like the worst moment of my life. Didn't have the wherewithal to go to 10 different websites. Like, absolutely not. And so the terrifying experience of becoming a cancer patient at 37 with 2 little kids became an alienating one as well. And so it really wasn't until I got introduced to another young mom with cancer, Amy Barnes, who became my co-founder for Bright Spot. We became fast friends. I was introduced to her at our cancer clinic. Basically, a nutritionist connected us. She was diagnosed with breast cancer while pregnant, and we had kids the same age. And, it was like one of those connections. Like sometimes you're connected to people because of a common experience, and it's just kind of like the common experience is the only thing that connects you. But with Amy and I, we still are very close friends. And, so much of what we talked about was our kids and like how are they going to survive this, and how could we be the best parents we could to them, and also, honoring our own cancer journey at the same time. And so, yeah, Bright Spot Network was born. over tacos one day when we were just hanging out. We were like, we should do this.
Yeah, and I think I was really impressed by your work because I never heard of any other organization that actually work with parents specifically, and I guess with children as well, so that
Mhm.
parents can have the right resources to communicate their cancer journey to their children. And I guess there are so many people that need this type of support.
Mhm.
So, through your experience, what are the biggest challenges that parents face when having to deal with a cancer diagnosis and parenting at the same time?
Well, I think parents like before cancer diagnosis have so much on their plate. Like they are dealing with arranging childcare for when they're working. They're figuring out how to pack a lunch for the next day, dinner on the table, naps, drop-offs, pickups, like all these things. And that's like just like the, kind of day to day. That's not even like the like emotional life of your kids, the temper tantrums, the hugs, the milestones, all of those things. Like parents just have so much on their plate. And so when you add a cancer diagnosis to that already full plate, the plate can just overflow. And so for a parent with cancer, that's so much of the experience is like you never stop being a parent, right? You could be sick with, side effects from treatment and you're still wondering like, okay, got to remind, Aunt Mary that like, my daughter doesn't like apples, like you're still a parent. You're never not a parent. And so I think that that's probably like the biggest challenge is juggling all the things you were dealing before, financial stress, um, on top of never ending doctor's appointments, side effects from treatment, the financial stress of a cancer diagnosis. For so many families, they're, not living with any savings, let alone enough money to prepare them for a whole medical crisis. And so all of these things together, I think, is really there's not one thing that I would say is the biggest challenge for a parent. It's really the like all of these things at once that can just be really overwhelming and then really just having to figure out how to ask for help.
Hmm. And what are the best ways to inform children about a parent's diagnosis of cancer? I guess that may vary depending on their age as well.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does vary on age, but the thing that we always say in at Bright Spot, well, I guess I should say, so when I was diagnosed, I had a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old, and people said to me, don't tell your 3-year-old, like she's not going to remember anything. And like as a parent, that just like never really like sat right with me. Like I always was like, I don't know, like my kid is seeing my tears that she maybe had never noticed before. She sees me and my husband whispering in the other room. Like her routine, even though we tried to keep it, stable, her routine is totally changed. Like, so she knows something is different. And if we don't tell her what's going on, she's going to make up her own stories. And that's what kids do is that they're going to make up their own stories if you don't tell them. And so as parents, we want to shield our kids from things that are scary or hard, but like our job is actually to like shepherd or walk our children through those difficult moments. And so just like the first thing is it's going to be a hard conversation, but it's an important one to have. And these are like the three things I would say that are kind of I guess I don't know if they're universal for all ages, but I think that there's like a universality in them is be honest and age appropriate. So for, your little kid, you don't need to give them all the details, but like let them know, that you're going to be getting a medicine and your hair might fall out. Like what are the changes in your body that you want to prepare your child for? Um, maybe you're going to start using a wheelchair or have an ostomy bag. Like those are important changes for your kid to just be aware of so that they're not scared when they happen. So be honest and age appropriate. And then, as you get older, your kid might have more questions. They might have questions about the biology of cancer. They might have questions about, what the medicine does, whatever it might be. So just be honest and age appropriate. The second thing I would say, and this is true even for teenagers, is you didn't cause it and you can't catch it. I think that it's really, really important. Even teenagers, like they might be worried, I had a fight with mom yesterday. Like did the stress of that fight cause this cancer? And for little kids, like I was saying, like they have their own kind of stories that are happening in their heads. And so it's really important to let them know they did not cause this cancer at all. This is a medical thing. This is biology. This is not their fault, and that they can't catch it, that they can hug you, that they can, be close to you, and that they're never going to catch the cancer from you. And then the last thing I would say that it's also kind of part of this like universality is always being open to questions. So like letting your child know that they can ask you any question that they have, and that you might not know the answer, but that you're going to do your best to find the answer. And then you try to find the answer, and like you have to find a way to tell them the answer to that question in a way that feels good. And it might be a question that like you kind of do know the answer to, but you like need to find a way to like say it that's going to like work for them. And so you take a beat and then you come back to them later and you give them that answer. And letting your kids know, being honest with them about the cancer diagnosis is going to let them give them more trust to be able to ask those questions that might be keeping them up at night. And then of course, just to like remind them that you love them, and that they're going to be safe, and that they're going to be taken care of no matter what happens, that that they are part of a family or a community. They have friends that love them.
Mm. Yeah, and when you were talking, something that made me think about the type of language we use. So you say it so simply, like,
Mhm.
"Oh, mom's has to take a medicine," and sometimes, in the adult realm, maybe doctors or the diagnosis itself use big words. And
Mhm.
just to go back to basic and be able to say something with so much honesty and simplicity at the same time, can put the message across.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, the other thing that we talk about a lot at Bright Spot is that it's important to use the word cancer, and not all families do. They don't feel comfortable with it. But, if you're thinking about like, what your kid is overhearing, they're overhearing you talk about cancer. They're overhearing you say the word cancer, and they maybe, especially like a 3-year-old, maybe has never heard that word before in their whole life. And so they don't have any baggage around cancer. Like they don't know anything about cancer. And so to be able to say, like mama has cancer, mama has an illness or a disease or whatever your family uses, and it's called cancer. And to really be able to like use that language to really name it, is actually quite powerful, I think, for the child to hear.
Mm. So, how does Bright Spot specifically fill the resource gap for parents navigating a cancer diagnosis?
Yeah, so we offer a bunch of different services. So we talk about how we take like a whole family approach to a parent's cancer diagnosis. So we offer support groups, virtual support groups that are peer led, that are for parents, that are for partners. We're piloting one right now for couples. But we offer, these support groups for both parents and partners. We have kids groups that are based in kind of like social emotional health. So a lot of like talking about feelings and things like that, songs, dance, books. It's very light, but is an opportunity for kids to learn how to talk about their feelings more, because that's going to serve them as they just in their life, but especially with a parent's cancer diagnosis. We have tools for helping parents to talk to kids about cancer. So one of our programs is a free book program. So you can go right online and order 2 free books that are meant to be like a window or a door into talking about cancer. Because that can be the hardest thing, is being like, oh my gosh, I have to sit down and have this conversation I super don't want to have. Like I know I'm gonna cry. I know it's gonna be hard. My kid's gonna be confused. I'm sad about this. I'm scared. But having a book, especially if your family's already reading together, having a book that you can take and be like, okay, like let's read about this other family, and then have that be like a window or a door into your own experience. So we have tools to talk about to kids about cancer. We also have like opportunities for parents and kids to connect. So we have a free art box that just comes right to your door. And I joke that it's like, hiding the broccoli in the noodles. There's nothing cancery in this art box. It's all art. It's just like glue and scissors, whatever. It's just art project, but the therapy is really in a parent and child connecting because it's good for the child and it's good for the parent. And then we have a bunch of we have a financial assistance grant. We have a $500 barrier-free assistance grant where parents can use the money in whatever way their family needs it most, because we know that, we don't know what your family needs right now, but you do. And so we trust families to spend the money in the ways that they best need it. And then we have a bunch of web resources. So we offer webinars and we have educational resources on our website and a bunch of cool stuff like that. So all of those things are really meant to kind of serve the whole family through the process.
Mm. So you had your own career changes and also the cancer diagnosis in some way, I don't know if I can say affected your career.
Oh, 100%.
How does cancer affect people's career overall? And is there enough support out there?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say there's two ways that cancer can affect your career. One is like a very practical way, is that it's hard to have cancer and be a worker, just to be an employee. There's not enough workplace protections in the United States, at least, for cancer patients to get the time off that they need, to not be worried about getting fired. There's a bunch of just like fears that come alongside. I mean, any sort of like serious medical diagnosis, not just cancer. And so I would just like put a plug in for a nonprofit called Triage Cancer. They do really great work of kind of connecting people to legal and financial help in the midst of a cancer diagnosis. And so that's just like a really real kind of material concern that a lot of cancer patients face. But I would say the kind of like bigger, more like existential question is like, cancer makes you take stock, like makes you take stock of like your friendships. It makes you take stock of maybe of your marriage, maybe of like habits that you want to hold on to or you want to leave. And then of course, you're spending 40 hours a week, potentially, maybe not always, maybe more, at a job. And so it makes you take stock of your job, of your career, and like whether or not you want to keep on, whether or not you want to keep on doing it. And so for me, I loved the work I was doing, but I was just so, when we started Bright Spot Network, Amy and I, neither of us were doing it full time. Like both of us had other stuff going on. But I was always just so pulled to the work. For me, it was like very therapeutic and healing to be working with other cancer patients, and especially people who had similar and different stories than my own. And I think that that's true for a lot of cancer patients that get involved in kind of other cancer work. But I think for so many cancer patients, it's just an opportunity to really like take stock. And I think a lot of people do end up making career shifts. And I want to put another plug in for an organization called Cancer and Careers. They do a lot of workshops actually about kind of switching careers after a cancer diagnosis, as well as the same kind of like workplace protections and things like that. But they have conferences and things like that, just to like kind of like, how do you adjust your resume for time where you were no longer working, or things like that, just to kind of think about kind of like how do we make sense of this change.
So if anyone would like to reach out to you or find the work you're doing, how and where they can find you?
So you can find Bright Spot Network at www.brightspotnetwork.org. So brightspotnetwork.org. And you should feel free to reach out to me directly for my email, which is Haley, Haley, at brightspotnetwork.org.
Thank you. So we are reaching the end of this episode, but we still have a few more questions. So first of all, if you could give only one piece of advice, what would you say to anyone during their journey, during their healing journey?
The thing that I always kept sort of like close to my heart during my own cancer experience was like all I can do today is put one foot in front of the other. And like that felt like so true. Like there was just days that I was like, that I couldn't put one foot in front of the other. And so I put it like, it was like the metaphorical one foot in front of the other is just like, how can I get through this day? It's like, just every minute, just like getting through just like every single day is just a series of putting one foot in front of the other. And that for me was really, really helpful and made it feel less scary to think, okay, well, I'm going to be in chemo for 6 more months. So how am I going to make it to the end of that 6 month period? But the truth is that like that was very overwhelming if I thought about it that way, because I was like, I feel terrible today. Am I going to feel terrible tomorrow? But if I really kind of like took a step back and was like, what I can do is get through today, it made the process a lot easier for me.
And now, really, the last question. If you could give yourself a piece of advice, what would you say to your younger self?
So I love that question. So there's this artist called Susan, her name's Susan O'Malley. And she died a few years ago, but she had this amazing art project where she asked people, I think that they were, anyway, it was all ages. It was like 7 to 80. And she asked them this question. And then she made these like really cool like posters with their answers. And I actually have a few of them in my office because I just am really inspired by that. Like asking a 7-year-old, like, what would you tell your younger self? Or asking an 80-year-old, what would you tell your younger self? And the thing that I always come back to is like, this is a good moment. Just like kind of really like falling into like this moment because it's so hard to do. And so I would just tell my younger self, like, this is the moment. Like, fall into this moment right now. Just be here.
Well, thank you, Haley, so much for joining us today and sharing your inspirational career change story and wisdom with our listeners.
Thank you. This has been so fun. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And the last message for our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and tune in next week for a new inspirational episode of the Career Changes. Thank you.